Quality Coaching Roadshow with Maaret and Margaret Deneen. We chat with people from all over the world to better understand what quality means to them and how to drive a quality mindset. What are you waiting for? Let's get this show on the road.
Welcome everyone. I'm very excited this week that we have, how can I just say, the wonderful Maaret with us on the Quality Coach Roadshow this afternoon, this evening, and this morning for you, Maaret. How would you describe yourself?
I'm Maaret Pyha from Finland, and currently I would probably call myself still a feedback fairy, but I'm kind of moving towards this idea that I find myself being a catalyst. Like there's reactions in companies that need to happen, usually around getting to good quality and happy teammates and all of that. And sometimes those reactions don't happen unless you put some kind of an ingredient in those organizations. And I find myself being that ingredient. And it's kind of like if it's messy, there's too much entropy, I calm things down. And if there's no movement, too much inertia, I start things up. And no matter what it looks like, it's always going to be different after you put someone like myself into that kind of an organization. Given a title, the one that I took right now is Principal Test Engineer. So I find that a lot of my career has been around doing different kinds of roles and crafting those roles to be whatever I want them to be. And sometimes I really like the idea of just calling myself a tester, regardless of what I do, because it confuses people so much when you have a low-level title and then you sort of behave as if you were something. So that kind of a role is what I do.
Comes with someone who's you would think is supremely confident to do that. Would you describe yourself as a confident person?
I don't think I would, actually. It's more on the side of, over the years, well, I've been doing this for 25 years. Over the years, bit by bit, I've started to understand that no one knows things in this industry. And in the recent weeks or months when I've had a trainee at the office, it's really become evident that we are learning together. Like, I have no clue of the questions she's asking from me, but I'm okay with not knowing. And I know that I can know in 4 hours, 2 days, whatever time frame. Whereas as that kind of like sitting with the discomfort and not being comfortable, not being confident is fine with me right now. But I do remember, especially looking at the newer person next to me, that was exactly where I was, that sitting with the discomfort it's a skill that I have had to learn. And,
right,
you get to that.
I try and look back and think of myself when my first testing role, and just, I don't know, I in some ways I was confident because I was blissfully unaware. I don't think that's necessarily for everyone, is it?
No, it's not necessarily for everyone. I remember specifically a moment about 15 years ago. It was my first time working for F-Secure. I had 2 different streaks in that company. And I was sitting at my desk and I was waiting for the moment when they realized I know nothing. 10 years into the industry, and I felt like I knew nothing. I was afraid of testing because I felt like if I was testing, because I was doing some test management work at that point, I was afraid that if I do testing, they realize that I'm a complete fake. And that I only find certain kinds of problems, or that I miss relevant problems. And I don't exactly remember how that changed, but I just remember kind of sitting with that again, that discomfort of I am no good, I'm going to be caught any moment now, and realizing that that's not an okay way to feel in the long term. And I just started kind of working on it and figuring out ways of learning more and more and more. And that's kind of the time frame when I started working with the communities a lot. Kind of going to people and learning with them so that if I was missing something, I would get the feedback on what I was missing in a way that I felt like I was in control of that feedback still. Kind of I could say, I'm going to hang out with this person for 2 hours and we're going to be doing this kind of testing for 2 hours. And if it revealed that I was a complete fake, I could run away. They wouldn't work with me necessarily. And tell everyone that. So kind of figuring out the way that I could get away from feeling continuously kind of like, you don't want that negative feeling on a day-to-day basis, but you need to work with that.
So just, I'm curious now. So when you went in and did this, did you let on? Did you kind of go, look, I don't know what I'm doing here, or did you kind of try and give this air of sort of just let's do this together, and then you'll be just like massively trying to observe and take in everything as much as you possibly could? Or were you quite open about the fact that you were in that position?
I wasn't open about the fact that I was in that position.
I'm not open either. I'm not an open person like that. So
yeah. I did explain. I remember at some point explaining to people that I really don't know this stuff either, and you know, we're figuring this out together. But it's time away from doing the thing when you're kind of like being protective and using time on that. So I figured out that me explaining myself wasn't the most important bit, but the most important bit was kind of like, you know, giving a, you know, the chance, serendipitous chance of something good coming out of people meeting. And the first sessions that I did with the community, they were not really like hands-on, one-on-one things, but they were kind of like, let's allow the whole group to do some kind of thing, you know, they can do it, and I can just observe them, and I can interject myself how much I can like feel safe to go there. And later on, like, it's been only in the last 5 years when I've been really kind of like actively going into this pairing and mobbing or ensemble testing, ensemble programming, which is what I call it now. Kind of like going into these settings where you're really kind of like openly showing all of your vulnerabilities and all of the things that you don't know. And I started to realize that no one really knows any of that stuff. And I really remember the first time I was mobbing when I realized that developers don't know how to write code, but they Google. Like, why didn't anyone tell me that? Like, it took me 20 years to get to the realization that even the competent developers actually go and search for stuff, but they're just really quick at searching. And that's a skill that you can then cultivate when you realize that you know, even exists. But it was funny that I needed to see them do it before I believed what they were already telling me, which is that they were Googling.
I think for me, like, actually going and doing software development was a huge thing for me. I think that's been one of my biggest fears, is I can't program. One of my first jobs, I'd go in and I would see that everyone seemed so knowledgeable and so experienced, and they're all doing C++ object-oriented code, and I'm just like sitting there going, I don't understand what they're doing. I'm going, I have no idea. And then the guy beside me, because they were all guys, I was the only woman, the guy beside me goes, oh, I just love this stuff. This is so awesome. This is so exciting. I was so scared of making a mistake. And because I was so confused. And I'll never forget that fear. And then eventually, to be honest, one of the reasons why I didn't stick with programming is because of that fear. And then because I was so good in the quality space, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna move into that because A, I love it. It's really interesting. And I don't have to do this kind of stuff over here. I don't have to face a fear that I don't really want to face right now. I don't feel like that anymore, but is this what you're talking about?
This is very much what I'm talking about. For me, I don't think what kept me away from programming was fear so much, but it was kind of like, it wasn't filling my basic need. And my basic need was connection with other people. Right. And the way programming was taught in the university back when I was studying, it's been a few years since, it was really kind of like you're given a book and then you're left to study alone. You're given problems that you need to solve, and then you're given feedback in the form of grades. But if you, for example, don't know that there's a functionality in your IDE, no one is basically teaching you that. You're supposed to figure that out by yourself. And a lot of the aspects that makes programming fun, like fun for real, like the way that I consider it fun, that I want to even do it, you know, on my own account, and not just when someone kind of like assigns me something where I need programming. What makes it fun is that you have the tools that make it efficient. And a lot of the stuff in the uni, the way they taught it, it didn't include pair programming. It didn't include using an IDE effectively. It didn't include test-driven development, which is kind of like, taking a step to explore one direction and seeing if that makes sense and if you're learning something more there. So none of the stuff that I enjoy, that wasn't included in the way that I was taught. And only when I got to a place where we started learning programming through basically mob programming, ensemble programming, only at that point I started realizing that, hey, there's this whole social aspect that was missing. And I'm an absolute fan of both pairs and groups, because that's the social aspect that helps everyone grow so much faster.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in pair programming environment and they were doing TDD. I worked in that for a couple of years. And I have to say, out of all the places I've worked in, like you, I've worked in lots and lots of different places, like walking around and people just going, how are we going to test this? Was just like so amazing to just hear those conversations. And they're hearing the conversations because they're in pairs and just they're discussing it, right? They're discussing constantly, like, how are we going to test this, or what do you think, or and you just had this such strength and also closeness, I think, between the devs, which kind of was such a powerful thing, I think, in that organization. In fact, to some degree, they were so close that it was a problem for everyone else, in a way, because the devs were so tight that it was like product couldn't get in and support struggled to get in. And, there was these kind of isolation that tightness created, which was interesting in itself. But yeah, where were we going with that?
So kind of this reminds me of some of the kind of like, I collect these bits and pieces that give me comfort and give me ideas of summarize the ideas that I have lived and learned. And one of the things really around pair programming and that sort of stuff is this idea that there's a saying that the developers who like each other, they pair, and the ones who don't, they do pull requests. So that's a dynamic that I often find myself seeing. And also it kind of reminded me of another one that I've been thinking about a lot around. We talked about failure earlier. And this idea that fail actually is, as an acronym, first attempt in learning. That's given me a lot of comfort over the years.
Yeah.
So again, like all of this stuff is, it's interesting ways of putting pieces together, because it's, again, people are the pieces that we're putting together. And a lot of it is kind of like figuring out what's the right way to put particular kinds of people together, whether they like each other or don't. They can still manage to work quite effectively together.
I want to tie this in with your work with upskilling people, which is something that I'm really passionate about as well. How do you, in a practical way, help people feel that it's okay to fail?
I generally start with them on kind of like listening to what they need. So it starts really with presence and making sure that you understand their concerns. But not getting stuck on just the concerns. You need to kind of create the action. And I find that a lot of the action is kind of like boxing something that is small enough to achieve, but it's big enough so that it stretches the person. And that's really the way that I find myself growing people is identifying the tasks that would help them grow, kind of like take them a little bit further than where they were before, but not giving them kind of the whole end-to-end result. And one of the things we've had to do this with the trainee that I'm working with right now is one of the goals for her this summer is that, of course, she learns to test. So she's been kind of paying attention that the first week she noticed only usability issues. And on week 3, she started noticing functionality issues, that this thing doesn't work. And she was able to kind of label them separately. And then she was able to ask, what other kinds of issues are there? So we talked about accessibility and security. And I said, you're not going to be touching performance this summer. And we talked about this idea of functionality and all the categories inside functionality and data and getting one by one into all of the aspects of what kind of things you might think while you're testing. But what I wanted her to get to is the ability to document in automation.